Hi, Booktube, it's Amy. I'm back again reading from the private papers of A Bankrupt Bookseller by Will Y. Darling. And today we are on page 60, titled Poetry and a Pun. That's our first heading here. And as a quick refresher, this is the fictionalized diary of a London bookseller, originally published in 1931. So here we go, Poetry and a Pun. A special show of most of my stock of poetry this week has proved a failure. People will buy poetry when it suits them, apparently, and yet a great paper like The Observer prints the following today. I have read it twice, once aloud, and I don't make much of it. I will now transcribe it, for writing, says the learned Bacon, maketh an exact man. It is from the Apology for Poetry by Sir Philip Sidney, and let it be noted that I haven't the book in stock. It is for my education's sake that I transcribe the quotation. Since, then, poetry is of all human learning the most ancient and of most fatherly antiquity, as from whence other learnings have taken their beginnings, since it is so universal that no learned nation doth despise it, nor no barbarous nation is without it, since both Roman and Greek gave divine names unto it, the one of prophesying, the other of making, and that indeed the name of making is fit for him, considering that whereas other arts retain themselves within their subject, and receive as it were their being from it, the poet only bringeth his own stuff, and doth not learn a conceit out of a matter, but maketh matter for a conceit. Since neither his description nor his end containeth any evil, the thing described cannot be evil. Since his effects be so good as to touch goodness, and to delight the learners, since therein, namely in moral doctrine, the chief of all knowledge, he doth not only far past the historian, but for instructing is well nigh comparable to the philosopher, and for moving no uncleanliness hath whole parts in it poetical, and that even our Saviour Christ vouchsafed to use the flowers of it, since all his kind are only in their united forms, but in their several dissections fully commendable. I think rightly, the laurel crown appointed for triumphing captains doth worthily of all other learnings honor the poet's triumph. That is a very, very wordy quotation. And that is technically all one sentence, I would add. It is littered with semicolons there. But continuing on with our reading, our narrator says, very clotted stuff that. If poetry were as dull, there would be less sale for it even than there is. My studies go farther. Referring to Brewer, 2 volumes, Castle, I add the following to my stores of knowledge. Poet is derived from Greek poio, to make. Poetical justice is that ideal justice which poets exercise in making the good happy and the bad unsuccessful in their schemes. And now, what do I know of poetry? Nothing. And what is nothing? Brewer, the Reverend E. Cobham, LL.D., to boot, helps me to the perfect answer, by a poet too. Nothing, wrote William Shakespeare, is a tune played by the picture of nobody. Thou art nothing, says another poet, thou shalt not be less. The poetical justice is done, and the eyes have it, and I am going to change my window tonight. I will put in biography, war books, a recent purchase of the historian's History of the World in 25 volumes, and the 100 best essays by the Earl of Birkenhead. Before going to bed, I will put up a prayer for a good sale, the bookseller on his knees for his needs. A pun, said Dr. Johnson. Was it Dr. Johnson now? He who would make a pun would pick your pocket. Happy augury. I will pick pockets tomorrow and give good books in exchange. And our next heading here is titled Americans and Their Books. America has been getting into my way a lot these last few days. The papers tell me we have signed an agreement with America, which will lower the standard of living for a generation. Without being a politician, I would haphazard the opinion that there may not be at all a bad thing. Plain living and high thinking are no more, deplored Wordsworth, but what Wordsworth deplored as gone may be restored by the unwilling act of the signatories to our acknowledgement of the American debt. Is it not true, anyway, that more nations have risen through adversity than through good fortune? Look at the Scots, for example. Anyway, I am not disposed to be alarmed. Alexander Hamilton's descendants may have remembered that he said that a national debt, if it is not excessive, will be to us a national blessing. And I hope it will not prove too good a prophecy to be true. But my interest in America is not a banker's interest, although it may be a debtor's. My interest is in American books, and today I am making a sort of survey of my stock. My survey brought me to recognize how far we have moved from the days when Sidney Smith wrote demanding, "Who reads an American book, or goes to an American play, or looks at an American picture or statue?" Pictures we do not have to any extent unless it be on these calendars, which American publishers send over here, or the picture magazine covers of Harrison Fisher and the cartoons of Budd. But American plays, by what I see when I go to London, are by no means so rarely seen. And books. American books in my small shop are surprising in numbers. I have the poets, of course, and will sell them to young college girls mostly. Longfellow still sells well, sells best, I think, but there is Whittier and Poe, Whitman and Russell Lowell, all still well to the fore. Poe ought to be more read than he is, and he is the least read of all. The Raven and the Bells are fine pieces of poetry, and surely Annabel Lee ought to be known by heart by every lover if he would make the most of the fine and fortunately fleeting mirage of love. I would like to have been able to recite such a romance, if I could, about my life, as that contained in these 4 lines. I was a child, and she was a child, in this kingdom by the sea, but we loved with a love that was more than love, I and my Annabel Lee. These are magic lines, and the whole poem is magical. The challenge of love to separation and dissolution and death never rang more clearly in literature than in. But our love, it was stronger by far than the love of those who were older than we, of many far wiser than we, and neither the angels in heaven above, nor the demons down under the sea, can ever dissever my soul from the soul of the beautiful Annabel Lee. Poe, I fear, is old-fashioned and is eclipsed by Ella Wheeler Wilcox as a bestseller. Her poems, and I am not one of their deriders, for I often read them, are among the best-selling poetry I have. All sorts buy them, men as well as women, and I am sure they are always worth, and more than worth, the price they pay for them. Among the essayists, Oliver Wendell Holmes has only had one inquirer since I came to take over this business. I have him in the World's Classic series. He is worth reading, and I write a special plea for his remembrance. He would like it, and I will please his memory by recalling the passage from The Poet at the Breakfast Table, where he perhaps foresaw his own dwindling fame, and had philosophy enough to face it and discount it as nothing. I suppose we all, he writes, those of us who write in verse or prose, have the habitual feeling that we should like to be remembered. It is to be awake when all of those who around us have been long wrapped in slumber. It is a pleasant thought enough that the name by which we have been called shall be familiar on the lips of those who come after us, and the thoughts that wrought themselves out in our intelligence, the emotions that trembled through our frames, shall live themselves over again in the minds and hearts of others. And so on, a very gentle, almost lamb-like passage, discussing the pros and cons of being forgotten and balancing the two thus. To become a classic and share the life of a language is to be ever open to criticisms, to comparisons, to the caprices of successive generations, to be called into court and stand a trial before a new jury once or more than once in every century. The other side is thus put. To be forgotten is to sleep in peace with the undisturbed myriads, no longer subject to the chills and heats, the blasts, the sleet, the dust which assail in endless succession that shadow of a man which we call his reputation. The line which dying we would wish to blot has been blotted out for us by a hand so tender, so patient, so used to its kindly task, that the page looks as fair as if it had never borne the record of our infirmity or of our transgression. And again, before I leave him, take these sweet waters for the consolation of most of us. Not unwelcome shall be the baptism of dust which hides forever the name that was given in the baptism of water. We shall have good company whose names are left unspoken by posterity. Who knows whether the best of men be known, or whether there be not more remarkable persons forgot than any that stand remembered in the known account of time? The greater part must be content to be as though they had not been, to be found in the register of God, not in the record of man. I do not grudge the transcribing of that, for I want to do my share in keeping the memory of Oliver Wendell Holmes green on this green earth for yet a little while longer. He is worth it, and I must speak to some of the comprehending who come to this shop of mine about this gentle essayist of the West. Emerson and Thoreau are favorites still, though not what they were when I was young. I would make all the schools have self-reliance and compensations read regularly. They inspire me, and I am weak, and need the first, skeptical of Providence sometimes, and need the second, and I am always the better of rereading them. Emerson's poetry, too, I have liked since I was a boy, though I have known none who has shared my liking. I have lost a piece beginning. Teach me your mood, ye patient stars, that climb each night the ancient sky, leaving no shade, no space, no scars, no trace of age, nor fear to die. I have misquoted, I think, but that passage somehow links up with Matthew Arnold's. Calm soul of all things, make it mine, to feel amid the city's jar, that there abides a peace of thine, man did not make and cannot mar. I have a lot of these mental affinities. I can't account for them. They may be deep calling to deeps across the void of the native emptiness of my own mind. Anyway, they make me humble and grateful. It is days since I wrote these words, and I come back to these scattered sheets of shelf paper with a farther knowledge of the books of America. I have had an American, a man who has commended my selection of American novels. Curiously enough, he had never read two of the older American writers, and I sold him a set of the Breakfast Table books, as well as Nathaniel Hawthorne's Scarlet Letter. It is part of the regular recurring surprises of life that an American born and bred should buy his first copies of these authors' works from a simple-minded book vendor in a provincial English town. It has restored my feeling of self-importance, and it has made me self-satisfied, condition I find almost essential to my happiness. This customer put me wise to Edna Ferber, and I got her 2 books, So Big and Fanny Herself. They sell, and I can recommend them. He confirmed my enthusiasm for Joseph Hergesheimer, and I offer his books with renewed confidence. Jack London's White Fang and John Barleycorn have always been books I felt I could speak favorably of to my customers, as well as enjoy privately. The first is surely unequaled as an animal book, and the second seems to have had its part in helping to plant prohibition in the States for all the good things it has to say about drink. I am reminded, another example of one literary allusion leading to another, I am reminded of Mr. Dooley's dictum about drink. The Mr. Dooley books I haven't got, but they were good, and this I always remember. Drink, said Mr. Dooley, never made any man better, but it's made millions of men think they were better. I think that it is the best case for drink I have yet heard, and it is tragic to think that it did not, with all its sweet reasonableness, stem the tide of frothy soda creams and sundaes which is, at present, threatening to engulf the thinking faculties of our American cousins. The letters of a self-made merchant to his son seem no longer to be in print, and that's a pity. They were good, and they compared well with their successors, the 5-minute sermons. Does he call them a Frank Crane? I think that Penman is wise in recognizing his reader's patience is limited to 5 minutes, but he is mistaken as regards me. I have literally and actually no time for Dr. Frank Crane, nor indeed any of his works. There are 2 American books that I ought to have mentioned, had not Dr. Crane awakened my doubtless unwarranted enmity. They are Walden by Henry David Thoreau and Jurgen by James Brant Cabell. I have read them both. I recommend them often, and they are worthy of any British bookshop, and indeed of any British reader. My shop calls me forth, and I go, the thought of a republic of letters glimmering in the brain of a bookseller whose ideal is to serve that republic with worthiness and understanding. I am a prig. Walden and Jurgen, what I have read about Walden and Jurgen, reads fantastically. Surely there was never a more extraordinary accidental juxtaposition. Henry David Thoreau pushes off with the mentality of a Greek philosopher and takes up his abode in the woods of Walden Pond. Pushing, thrusting, striving, newly born America goes farther back into nature and back into history as far as mind can take it. James Brant Cabell, a generation later, in a still more thrusting, pushing America than the other one that Thoreau knew goes back to, but not so far back. He goes back to the happy days of medievalism and their riots gorgeously. Apparently, America as it is never tolerable for Americans. Thoreau goes back to Greece, in mind at any rate. Cabell goes back to the Middle Ages. And all these fellow citizens, whenever they have the money, pack up to go east, west, and everywhere with all the speed that they can acquire. I am afraid I am getting to dislike Americans, and I must check this weakness in my temperament. And so that is the end of that section. The next section here will be called Notes on Suicide, followed by additional notes on suicide, where we will see the bookseller's state of mind start to take a turn. And I think we're already seeing a bit of that turn in this section here on poetry, where his thoughts are getting much more rambling, and his train of thought is becoming a little bit more difficult to discern as we read on. So as I said, the next chapter will be titled Notes on Suicide. So if you would like to tune in for that, stay tuned for the next video.